Breaking news: Russia is facing an unprecedented fuel collapse after a series of explosions struck key oil refineries across the country. According to multiple sources, the attacks have crippled several major processing facilities, disrupting production and causing immediate shortages. Official statements insist that the situation is under control, but eyewitness reports tell a different story. In dozens of cities, gas stations stand empty, queues stretch for kilometers, and drivers are being turned away. The promise of endless energy, once the cornerstone of Russia's national pride, is now dissolving in the smoke rising above its refineries. Experts describe the scale of the damage as catastrophic, not only for the economy but for the political system built upon it. The first explosions were reported in the southern regions, near facilities vital to refining and export. Within hours, footage circulated online showing flames consuming vast industrial complexes. Authorities moved quickly to suppress the images, labeling them misinformation, yet satellite data confirmed multiple large-scale fires. Insiders describe chaos in the energy sector, transportation halted, pipelines redirected, emergency meetings convened at the highest levels. The system was never prepared for this, one source admitted. Everything depended on the illusion of security. That illusion, observers note, has now been shattered. The economic impact is immediate. Domestic fuel prices have soared, and rationing has begun in several regions. Transport companies report that deliveries are being cancelled, agricultural producers warn of halted operations, and airlines face severe logistical challenges. The ripple effect spreads far beyond the fuel market, pushing inflation higher and undermining confidence in the state's ability to manage crises. For a country that built its wealth and influence on oil, the symbolism is devastating. It's not just about energy, an economist explained. It's about identity. Inside Moscow, the tone is tense but controlled. Officials insist that the situation is temporary and that repairs are underway. Yet analysts familiar with the infrastructure warn that rebuilding may take months. Modern refinery technology depends on imported components that sanctions have made difficult to replace. Even before the attacks, the sector was under strain from maintenance shortages and outdated equipment. Now, with several facilities offline, the system faces a bottleneck with no clear solution. Observers underline that this crisis exposes the fragility of a structure long portrayed as invincible. Public reaction reflects a mixture of disbelief and anger. In rural areas, farmers are running out of diesel for machinery. In industrial towns, buses and delivery vehicles are idle. Social media channels fill with videos of long lines and arguments at gas stations. The official narrative, that supplies remain stable, contrasts sharply with visible reality. Sociologists note that when citizens experience shortages directly, official reassurances lose meaning. People may tolerate many things, one researcher said, but not the failure of something as basic as fuel. The political implications are equally significant. For years, the government presented cheap, abundant energy as proof of competence and sovereignty. Now, that promise has been broken. Analysts warn that this moment could mark a shift in public perception. If the state cannot guarantee stability in its most strategic sector, what can it guarantee at all? The question, once unthinkable, is now being asked quietly across the country. Internationally, the explosions have shocked markets. Oil prices spiked as traders scrambled to assess the damage, while foreign governments issued cautious statements. Diplomats describe the situation as a potential turning point. Russia's claim to be a reliable energy power, even under pressure, has been severely undermined. For its partners abroad, the crisis raises doubts not only about supply but about control. A country that cannot protect its own refineries, one European official commented privately, cannot project strength. The full picture of the attacks remains unclear, but the consequences are already visible. Black smoke over industrial cities, silent gas pumps, and the growing sense that something fundamental has broken. Analysts underline that this is not only a story about oil, it is a story about a system built on the illusion of permanence. And when permanence collapses, it does so suddenly. For those who want to keep following how this crisis transforms Russia's economy, politics, and position on the global stage, subscribing will ensure you stay connected to the deeper analysis beyond official statements and short headlines. According to our sources, the situation unfolding across Russia's energy sector is worse than officially acknowledged. The Ministry of Energy has introduced a system of emergency quotas, prioritizing military and government transport over civilian supply. Regional administrations are instructed to optimize distribution, a phrase insiders interpret as permission to ration. In several territories, private fuel sales have been temporarily suspended. Governors, caught between federal directives and local anger, are struggling to maintain calm. Observers report that police patrols have been deployed to major gas stations to prevent unrest. The scenes resemble crisis management more than routine governance. Economic analysts stress that the shock to the refining network is only part of the problem. The logistics that sustain the entire energy supply chain, pipelines, storage depots, rail transport, depend on the synchronization of dozens of components. When one link fails, the rest begins to strain. The current disruptions expose how dependent Russia's internal market is on a few critical nodes. With refineries in the south and west offline, fuel must be transported from distant regions at enormous cost. This imbalance is creating a two-speed economy. While some areas still have fuel, others are effectively cut off. Insiders describe this as a logistical nightmare with political consequences. Within business circles, confidence is evaporating. Transport companies, already under pressure from sanctions, now face shortages that threaten to halt entire sectors. Factories reduce production, retailers raise prices, and small businesses close temporarily. Economists estimate that each week of disruption costs billions in lost output. It's not just an oil crisis, one financial expert noted. It's a crisis of predictability. Investors, domestic and foreign alike, depend on stability. When the foundation of that stability, the fuel supply, collapses, so does the sense of security that underpins the economy. Internationally, reactions are measured but watchful. Energy markets adjust rapidly, with global traders recalculating risk premiums for Russian exports. European and Asian partners, long dependent on discounted crude, fear extended shortages. Some begin quietly exploring alternative suppliers, accelerating diversification plans that once seemed distant. Analysts underline that Russia's reputation as a dependable energy partner is eroding faster than its infrastructure can recover. Markets remember disruptions, one observer said. Trust, once lost, takes years to rebuild. Inside the country, the public mood continues to darken. The absence of reliable information amplifies anxiety. State media repeat phrases about technical incidents and planned maintenance, but these words ring hollow against the backdrop of empty fuel pumps. Social media, despite tightening restrictions, has become the main channel for news. Videos of fires, blocked highways, and arguments at gas stations circulate widely before being deleted, only to reappear elsewhere. Each deletion fuels suspicion that the truth is being hidden. Sociologists describe a familiar pattern: when official silence grows, people fill it with rumor. And rumors, unlike facts, are impossible to control. In Moscow, the leadership faces an uncomfortable dilemma. Acknowledging the scale of the damage risks appearing weak, denying it risks losing credibility altogether. For now, officials have chosen a middle course, partial admissions framed as victories. Every minor repair is presented as a sign of recovery, every delivery as proof of resilience. Yet experts close to the industry warn that such messaging cannot mask the reality of structural failure. Modern refining systems are fragile when isolated. Without access to Western equipment and spare parts, many facilities cannot be repaired quickly. Even small delays compound into systemic breakdowns. This is not a fire you can extinguish in a week, an insider remarked. It's a long-term wound. Regional tensions are rising. Governors in industrial centers demand additional fuel allocations, agricultural regions warn of collapsing harvests, border territories complain of prioritization for the capital. The perception that Moscow protects itself first is reigniting an old grievance, that the provinces bear the cost of the center's policies. Political scientists note that such perceptions, once reinforced, are difficult to reverse. Even if supplies improve later, the memory of scarcity will linger. Meanwhile, on the ground, everyday life adjusts to a new rhythm of uncertainty. Drivers plan trips by rumor, factories delay shipments, and families stockpile what little fuel they can find. Black market sales emerge despite official crackdowns. Observers emphasize that the appearance of informal trade is a clear sign of systemic stress. When the official economy fails to deliver, people turn to improvisation. That improvisation, while temporarily effective, deepens inequality and undermines authority. Experts now debate whether the crisis represents a temporary disruption or a structural turning point. The consensus is shifting toward the latter. Russia's vast energy system, long viewed as untouchable, is showing signs of internal exhaustion. Even if repairs restore output, the psychological impact, the realization that vulnerability exists, will persist. The myth of endless oil, an analyst concluded, has finally burned out. Analysts now agree that what Russia faces is not a temporary disturbance but a systemic collapse of confidence. The destruction of key oil refineries has triggered a chain reaction that reaches far beyond fuel shortages. Transport, agriculture, and manufacturing, every major sector depends on stable energy flows. Without them, production slows, supply chains fracture, and prices rise. What began as explosions at industrial sites has become a national paralysis. Insiders admit that the state was unprepared for such a scenario. For decades, officials assumed that the oil infrastructure was both protected and irreplaceable. Now, that assumption lies in ruins. According to sources close to the government, emergency meetings have been held daily in Moscow to coordinate responses. Ministries issue overlapping directives, regional administrations compete for limited supplies, and communication between agencies has broken down. No one knows who is actually in charge, one official quietly told reporters. The Ministry of Energy blames foreign sabotage. The Security Council insists that the situation is stabilizing. Economists, however, describe something different, a cascade failure of a system built on centralization. When all control flows through the capital, disruption anywhere becomes disruption everywhere. In the streets, the atmosphere is tense but restrained. Queues at gas stations have become part of daily life, with people waiting for hours in hope of a single refill. Taxi services raise prices dramatically, while public transport operates on reduced schedules. In rural areas, farmers abandon machinery and return to manual labor. The government has promised compensation, but delays and bureaucracy limit delivery. Citizens describe a growing sense of exhaustion. It's not just the lack of fuel, one man told local media. It's the feeling that no one knows what's happening. Behind the scenes, business leaders voice alarm. Many have begun transferring remaining capital into foreign currencies or tangible assets. The ruble, already under pressure, weakens further. Financial institutions tighten lending as liquidity dries up. Analysts note that this behavior reflects a loss of trust not only in markets but in governance. When those closest to power begin to protect themselves rather than the system, the balance shifts irreversibly. The elite are saving themselves, one economist observed, not the country. Diplomatic reactions remain cautious but significant. Foreign governments express concern about the stability of global energy supply chains. In Europe, policymakers emphasize the need to accelerate independence from Russian energy. In Asia, buyers demand steep discounts, citing unreliable production. The message is clear: Russia's image as an energy superpower has been replaced by an image of instability. The consequences, experts warn, will endure long after the fires are extinguished. Trust once lost in energy markets rarely returns. Inside Russia, state media adjusts its tone. Early denials have been replaced by controlled admissions, technical incidents, temporary interruptions, unforeseen difficulties. Yet even this calibrated language cannot mask the visible signs of distress. Analysts point out that censorship, while limiting information, cannot alter perception. Empty roads, closed stations, and halted trucks speak louder than official statements. The effort to maintain normalcy itself becomes proof of crisis. For the political leadership, this moment carries profound implications. The narrative of control, the belief that the state can manage any challenge, has been undermined. In systems built on central authority, perception of weakness spreads quickly. Once citizens see that control can falter, they begin to question other certainties. Political scientists note that this is how legitimacy erodes, not through open revolt, but through quiet disbelief. When disbelief becomes habit, authority weakens invisibly. International observers describe the situation as a test of endurance. Russia's leadership faces simultaneous crises: economic, logistical, and psychological. The visible explosions were only the beginning. The deeper shock lies in the realization that resilience may no longer be guaranteed. A system that depends on fear and abundance cannot survive scarcity, an analyst in Brussels remarked. That scarcity is now visible, and it is reshaping expectations both inside and outside the country. For those who want to follow how this collapse, from refineries to markets, from public patience to elite confidence, unfolds and reshapes Russia's place in the global order, subscribing will ensure you stay connected to the ongoing analysis that looks beyond surface events to the deeper structures now fracturing beneath them. International experts now warn that Russia's fuel collapse could evolve into one of the most severe economic disruptions in its modern history. The country's energy infrastructure, long regarded as untouchable, has proven far more vulnerable than anticipated. The damage to refineries not only cripples domestic supply but threatens the entire export system that sustains the budget. Observers note that while officials insist on recovery, the logistical and technological obstacles are immense. Equipment needed for repairs is largely imported, while skilled specialists have left the country amid sanctions and political tension. You cannot rebuild decades of expertise overnight, one industry veteran commented. And you cannot refine oil with declarations. The broader impact extends beyond fuel. Transportation bottlenecks are spreading across the economy. Freight trains wait for days as fuel allocation shifts unpredictably. Factories delay production schedules, ports operate below capacity, and agricultural supply chains falter. Inflation accelerates as transportation costs surge. Analysts stress that these pressures create a feedback loop. Every shortage produces panic buying, and panic buying worsens shortages. The government's attempts to enforce price controls offer temporary relief but lead to new distortions. Black markets emerge, offering fuel at exorbitant prices. The same pattern observed in other crisis economies, scarcity, speculation, corruption, is now visible across Russia. Regional divisions deepen as the crisis continues. Governors in remote areas complain that Moscow prioritizes the capital at their expense. Some openly warn of critical situations in agriculture and transportation. Local administrations introduce rationing systems, limiting private fuel purchases to essential workers. Observers underline that such measures, though presented as temporary, erode trust in federal authority. When citizens see regional leaders improvising in isolation, they understand that unity is faltering. The sense of one country breaks down, a political analyst said. Each region begins to think for itself. Inside government circles, frustration grows. Ministries compete for limited resources and political favor. Some officials push for emergency imports through unofficial channels, while others advocate for prioritizing military needs above all else. The lack of coordination reflects deeper structural weaknesses. Analysts explain that a system built on vertical control functions effectively only when resources are abundant. When scarcity sets in, the same hierarchy turns rigid and slow, unable to adapt. Decisions take days, sometimes weeks, as each level waits for instructions from above. In crises, such delays become fatal. The population adapts in silence. Reports describe quiet streets, reduced traffic, and a sense of suspended motion. Citizens avoid unnecessary travel, conserving what fuel remains. In cities, public transport is overcrowded, while rural communities revert to older, less efficient methods of transport. The psychological toll grows heavier. People speak of exhaustion, not anger, a weary acceptance that the promises of stability have failed. It feels like the 1990s again, one woman told a regional newspaper. Only this time, we were told it would never happen. Such sentiments, once rare, now echo widely. Sociologists warn that disillusionment on this scale has long-term consequences. When hope disappears quietly, it rarely returns. On the global stage, the crisis reshapes perceptions of Russia's power. Energy partners who once saw Moscow as a guarantor of supply now view it as a liability. Long-term contracts are reconsidered, insurance premiums rise, and alternative suppliers gain ground. Even if production resumes, the loss of reliability will remain. Energy diplomacy, once the cornerstone of Russia's influence, now weakens with each passing week. Diplomats in Europe and Asia privately describe a post-Russian phase in energy planning, a gradual decoupling that once seemed impossible but now feels inevitable. The financial strain deepens. With export revenues falling, the state budget faces growing deficits. Emergency borrowing increases, reserves are depleted, and domestic spending is cut. Social programs are quietly reduced, subsidies delayed, and regional transfers postponed. Economists warn that the result will be cumulative, a slow erosion of purchasing power, a rise in poverty, and declining confidence in public institutions. The crisis began with oil, one expert remarked, but it is ending with trust. Meanwhile, the information landscape tightens further. State media avoid mentioning the word collapse, focusing instead on patriotic themes and historical comparisons. Independent voices that question the official narrative face renewed pressure. Yet censorship has diminishing power when daily life contradicts official statements. Each empty gas station becomes its own broadcast, each delayed bus its own report. The gap between rhetoric and reality widens beyond repair. Observers note that regimes survive economic hardship, but rarely survive disbelief. Once people stop believing what they are told, control becomes performance, visible, but hollow. In private conversations, some members of the elite express concern that the current trajectory is unsustainable. They speak carefully, avoiding direct criticism, but their meaning is clear. The question is no longer whether the crisis will end, but what will remain when it does. Few dare to answer. Analysts underline that the collapse of fuel supply is not merely a technical failure. It is the exposure of an illusion, the illusion that abundance guarantees stability. And when that illusion burns, the foundations built upon it begin to tremble. Observers now describe the unfolding events as a slow-motion collapse. The explosions that destroyed several of Russia's largest oil refineries may have been the trigger, but the causes run deeper. They reveal a system stretched beyond its limits, one that relied on control instead of flexibility, on fear instead of foresight. Analysts emphasize that what Russia faces today is not simply a shortage of fuel, it is a shortage of trust, capacity, and direction. Once those are lost, no decree can restore them. Insiders close to the government admit privately that the state underestimated both the scale of the damage and the fragility of the response network. Emergency repairs proceed slowly, replacement parts are scarce. Equipment that once came from foreign suppliers must now be produced domestically, often at lower quality and higher cost. The result is a patchwork recovery effort, one that looks functional on paper but falters in practice. "We can restart production," one industry official said, "but we cannot restart confidence." This confidence, built over decades, has evaporated in a matter of weeks. The economic consequences are cumulative. Fuel shortages slow transport, which in turn weakens supply chains, which then raise prices and deepen inflation. Every attempt at stabilization feeds a new imbalance. Officials redirect resources to key industries, but that leaves others neglected. When the government freezes prices, black markets fill the gap. When it restricts exports to preserve domestic supply, foreign partners retaliate with new barriers. The more the system tightens its grip, the less control it actually has. Economists describe the situation as managed chaos, a phrase that encapsulates the paradox. The state acts constantly, but each action worsens the instability it seeks to contain. Politically, the cost is rising. The myth of resilience, the idea that Russia could endure any hardship, is fading. Citizens now witness shortages that official propaganda cannot explain away. Local frustrations multiply, though few dare to express them openly. In private, conversations shift from anger to disbelief. "It's not the crisis that shocks us," a resident of Ekaterinburg told reporters. "It's that they said this could never happen." Sociologists underline that disbelief is more dangerous than protest. Protests can be contained, disbelief spreads silently, eroding the emotional foundation of loyalty. The elite, once confident in their insulation from crisis, are beginning to hedge. Business magnates discreetly transfer wealth abroad through intermediaries. Regional officials limit their exposure, delaying decisions that might draw blame. Even within state corporations, competition intensifies as departments fight for limited resources. Analysts stress that such behavior is typical of systems entering decline, outward obedience paired with inward detachment. "No one wants to be the first to move," one observer explained, "but no one wants to be the last to fall." On the international stage, Russia's image continues to deteriorate. Energy partners seek alternative routes, banks restrict lending, and insurers classify Russian shipments as high risk. Diplomats in Europe describe a structural reordering of the energy map, one in which Russia is no longer the anchor but the uncertainty. The collapse of refineries is now cited in policy discussions across capitals as evidence that Moscow's control over its core industries can no longer be assumed. For a nation that once defined itself through energy dominance, this shift represents more than economic loss, it is the erosion of identity. The social impact grows clearer by the week. With transport limited and prices rising, citizens adapt to scarcity as a new normal. Farmers cut planting areas to save fuel, factories run on reduced schedules, and regional economies contract. The government promises recovery, but few believe in quick solutions. In quiet conversations, people recall the stability of previous decades with a mixture of nostalgia and irony. "We used to laugh at shortages," one man told an interviewer. "Now we stand in line again." The cycle, once broken, has returned. Experts underline that crises like this rarely end with dramatic collapse, they fade into prolonged stagnation. The visible fires are extinguished, but the damage remains economic, psychological, political. Over time, fatigue replaces outrage, and the system continues to operate, weaker but still standing. Yet the illusion of invulnerability is gone. And once a state built on that illusion begins to doubt itself, the path forward is unpredictable. The story of the refinery explosions will eventually leave the headlines. Repairs will be made, some supplies will resume, and officials will claim victory. But analysts caution that beneath the surface, something irreversible has changed. The myth of endless abundance, of oil as an inexhaustible guarantee of strength, has been broken. What remains is a landscape of exhaustion and doubt, where every promise sounds hollow and every reassurance feels temporary. For those who want to keep following how this crisis, from economic breakdown to political disillusionment, reshapes Russia's future and its standing in the world, subscribing will ensure you stay connected to deeper, verified analysis that looks beyond the headlines and traces the slow shifts defining this new reality.